I've been thinking about making some videos on guns for shit hits the fan, and I might make more of these on various topics, but on this first one, I wanted to just talk about the best gun for shit hits the fan, which is a complicated topic that you could go 1,000 different directions in. But to me, in my experience, the best gun for any of these sort of situations is a smaller kind of pocket concealed carry type gun, whether that's, you know, something like a J-frame revolver or one of the tiny Glocks, like a Glock 43 or Glock 26, or a car pistol. This type of gun gives you options that a lot of the other ones don't. A lot of people would be like, well, I need my AR-15 and my shotgun and 12 handguns, and I'm going to be like Rambo out there in the woods just capping people. Okay. In my opinion, that's just not very realistic. The reason the little concealed carry piece is my #1 choice for shit hits the fan is either you're at your home, you know, bugging in or whatever, staying where you are, and you're just going to be going about your kind of daily shit, but now the world is ending. Well, having a gun in your pocket all the time is a good idea. Or you're moving from wherever you are to a more safe location, and then you're bugging out. And that's where this gun, I think, really comes to shine, because it's concealable. It's very concealable. And while the world could have devolved to the point that there's roving gangs of Mad Max looters and people wearing plate carriers, and it looks like downtown Iraq in 2004, the chances of that, I think, are kind of slim. I see a lot of people that talk about preparedness guns or whatever, and I watched a video in particular the other day from Brass Facts, a channel here on YouTube, talking about the idea of civilian Green Berets. And he was showing footage of him and his buddies out doing what's called LARPing, where they're wearing a bunch of military equipment and camouflage and have their fucking $5,000 plus rifles. And don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place where that shit could save your life. I just think it's way more likely that you're going to carry a bunch of shit you don't need, that you're never going to use, or that someone's going to see that shit and associate you as a threat and kill you. And in the, like, hey, we have to move, we're bugging out kind of situation, who knows what you'll be passing through. And in some sort of scenario like this, there could be fucking government checkpoints on the road looking for fucking terrorists. And you, as your civilian Green Beret or whatever, and your team of dudes, well, you guys are pretty much by definition fucking terrorists. Right? Like, look at it from the government's perspective, not from your perspective. There's now an armed group of, 20 dudes led by 4 or 5 guys that look like fucking Green Berets without the training. What does that look like to you? Who runs that group? What are they doing? Like, you have made yourself into a threat that someone at some point, whether it's some rancher in the backcountry or a government roadblock or the police or insert anything you fucking want here, is going to consider you a threat enough that they're going to get 500 dudes together, nail you down in a position, and fucking kill you. This is the advantage of the little J-frame snubby or subcompact 9mm pocket gun. You are armed, you have a gun, you can defend yourself. Is it as good as with an AR-15? Probably not, but you could have something like that broken down in your bag too, I suppose. But the chances of you getting out an AR-15 and assembling it in some sort of situation like this, I think, is unlikely. Plus, you're carrying the bulk and weight of that. How much ammunition can you really carry for the rifle? You know, if you're in a vehicle, quite a bit, but who says you're going to have a vehicle. And this is the other kind of pro of the little James Bond pocket pistol, is it's fucking light. You know, enough ammunition to fill your mags 2 or 3 times for it is pretty fucking light for the most part. Like, even if you're on foot, you could easily carry this. Anyone pretty much could. It doesn't attract a lot of attention. And if it is found at a checkpoint, depending on the situation, you might be in trouble, you might not be. Like, if it's a situation where it's bad enough that they're like, yeah, people are going to have some guns, that's a type of gun and a look that most cops or National Guard or whatever it is would consider to be legitimate civilian self-defense. You know, you go on about your business. Versus, man, we have 6 guys with AKs and ARs and 5,000 rounds of ammo apiece and enough water to last out in the desert for forever and a whole bunch of food. And, like, these are things to consider. You know, you don't want to stand out in the fucking crowd. That's like survival tip number 1 for most places. Like, go to the third world and shit like that. Like, you'll find out pretty quickly that standing out in the crowd is not a good idea. And when you're carrying a $5,000 rifle, wearing a plate carrier, and have a helmet with, you know, $10,000 worth of night vision on it, you really stand out. That is not normal. I don't care where you are. Like, unless you're on a fucking, you know, army base where Delta Force trains or some shit like that. Like, that's how some of these guys are kitted out. They look like fucking Green Berets and Delta Force. In my opinion, the army of fucking, like, 500 people with fucking SKSs that you come across is probably just gonna kill you and take your shit. You know, this is where being able to look fairly normal and negotiate your way through situations is way more important than being badass and able to kill 100 people. Because even if you can kill 100 people, what if you're facing 500 people? You know? Well, I want to be as capable as I can be. Well, that's great. It's just, it's not realistic. Life is not Call of Duty. You're not going to be in constant fucking gun battles and running night raids and fucking the end of the world. And if you are, you're not going to live very long. Anyway, the small pistol gets you something, and that's, you know, in this situation in particular, I'm thinking mostly about defense from human beings. But let's say everyone has let their fucking dogs loose and there's just roaming packs of dogs on the street now, and they're eating whatever they can fucking eat because they're starving. You might want to have something for that too. And that's where, you know, an AR-15 would be better, yes, but I guarantee you, you shoot 2 or 3 dogs out of a group of dogs, the rest of the dogs aren't sticking around to find out what the fuck happens to the rest of them. And to some extent, people are the same way, assuming you're not coming across that 500-man militia party that is, you know, out for your blood because they think you're fucking terrorists and are gonna kill their wives and kids and shit. Assuming that, like, you run across some small criminal element. If you kill a handful of them, the rest of them are probably gonna fuck off. And, you know, if they don't, reload, you know? The chances of you running across somebody that's armed with assault rifles and body armor and machine guns and night vision or whatever that's going to be a big enough threat to justify carrying all the crap that you want to carry is unlikely. Okay? And if you want to have some of this shit just because it's cool guy gear or whatever, okay, I get it. You want to be as prepared as possible. Okay, I get it. Like, I've been there in my life, but to think that that's going to be a realistic thing 99.9% of the time is just, you live in a fucking fantasy. Now, what about carrying like a Glock 19 or something like that? Still concealable, more capable in basically every capacity, right? My argument against that would basically be that the gun is heavier, bulkier, and at that point you have to have a holster on your hip. And there's nothing really wrong with that, but if you're walking a long distance, in my opinion, most of that sucks. Unless it's, you know, an open carry outside the waistband holster, in which case you're starting to make yourself more of a target again. And this is where, you know, having that little pocket pistol either in your pocket or in the top of your backpack or something like that, I think makes a whole lot of sense. I wouldn't get something in like 380 or 32. I'd get a 9mm probably. As far as power to weight ratio and capacity and all of this shit and ammo commonality, availability, I think 9mm is the way to go. They make pretty tiny guns in 9mm now. I say stuff about a, you know, J-frame 38 snub nose a lot, but as good of a gun as that is, it wouldn't be my first choice. It's just a choice in this kind of category. It wouldn't be my first choice because your rounds limited, number one. You basically got a Derringer. Like, a lot of people would be like, a J-frame isn't a Derringer. Well, in my mind, a Derringer is a small, low-capacity handgun. And in the modern parlance, like, it's not a traditional Derringer, but it is the most effective Derringer that you can carry. It's not a real gun like a, you know, a Glock 43X or something like that is, or a SIG P365, or even like a car, or maybe a little, you know, tiny 1911 thing, whatever you want to fucking carry. Like, I wouldn't carry the 1911. I've owned some little tiny carry 1911s, and for the amount of rounds you get, they're just kind of fucking heavy. There's better options. Now, the question would be, well, at what point have things devolved so much that it doesn't matter about blending in anymore, and it doesn't matter about having a concealment piece, and you need all that, you know, civilian Green Beret shit? Well, I don't think we've ever seen that in this world. Even like war zones and third world countries and shit like that never get to the point where civilians are openly just wandering the streets in tactical gear. Unless it's like a civil war or something like that. And then the people that are doing that are combatants. And you know what happens to them more often than not? They get fucking dead. You know? This is where, do you want to fight the government or whatever, or do you want to stay alive? Like, this is an important question, you know? If your goal is to stay alive, being, you know, less visible, lower profile, and mobile keeps you that way. Looking like not a threat keeps you that way. Most people don't just go around shooting everyone that they fucking can, because most people realize that if you do that long enough, eventually you're going to get dead in some way. What people do is go around and shoot things that they think are threats to them. And if you look like an enemy combatant, your propensity to get shot goes up a lot. So, kind of my opinion on this is basically never. Like, if the world devolved to the point where, like, you know, it's small Mad Max communities and farms and raiders and whatever, you're not going to see the people in the small towns and shit dressing like fucking, you know, military commandos. You might see people with rifles slung a little bit more. And, like, in my opinion, that's not a thing that's going to be in shit hits the fan for many years. Our society is just too built up, and there are too many fucking people that someone is always going to think that they, run the show. And as such, if you pose a threat to that, whether it's a town sheriff or a governor or whoever it is, you're not going to live very long. Now, if you're on the town sheriff or governor's fucking hit team or whatever, maybe then you are going to be wearing some of that shit, but it's probably going to be given to you, or you're going to pull it out of wherever you have it hidden. But for the vast majority of people, I think that's really unlikely. I'm still laughing at the whole idea of civilian Green Berets. His point in that video was that the people around you aren't going to know what to do, and you're going to have to teach them what to do. I guess. But, like, what makes you think you're the subject matter expert? I mean, in that situation, I wouldn't always think I am. I know quite a bit of shit or whatever. I talk about a lot of different shit on this channel, mainly because it's fun and I'm bored. But you'll find that real subject matter experts are the quiet person at the back of the room not saying anything. Well, the dickhead who thinks he's a civilian Green Beret is up there trying to gather everybody to give a lecture on basic marksmanship or some shit. And the other reality is, if they haven't learned these skills well before this goes off, you're not going to be able to teach them anything worth knowing in the, few days you probably have to fucking teach it to them. I wouldn't waste my time. They're probably going to die. And this is, either they're going to die or they're going to be among the hungry masses. Worry about you and yours and not, well, these are my 12 buddies from the resistance group and we need to go out and recruit militia members to arm and train to, like, you're just a fucking retard. I'm sorry. Like, if it is really genuinely civil war and you think we're fighting for our rights or whatever, okay. The chances of you actually affecting anything with your participation in that is slim. The government is massive. The government is the best prepper on earth. If it's, half of the states fighting half of the other states like it was in the Civil War, go join whatever side that you want to join and they'll give you fucking equipment and training and whatever. Like, it's going to be a real war at that point. It's not going to be, a group of civilian Green Berets leading their 200-man militia against whatever the fuck it is you have in your mind that you think that that's a good idea. People's idea of, like, what a shit hit the fan scenario is like and what you'll need is just insane to me. For at least a couple of years after the world ends, I would think walking around with a long gun probably isn't a great idea. Whether it's making you a target for just average everyday people, or making you a target for what's left of the government because they're hunting insurgents or whatever, and you're going through a checkpoint and now you have an AK slung over your shoulder. Unless everybody is doing that, in which case, go for it. But again, in America, the vast majority of people just aren't going to do that. I don't care what the situation is. And if you want, why do I think that? Let's look back at history. We've had some pretty, gnarly shit go down in history, and that never happened. Look at the Civil War, look at the Old West. In the Old West, cowboys out on the range would have a saddle rifle or something like that, but they wouldn't be the normal person or whatever. There were plenty of like just settlers making their way across the plains and townspeople and whatever. What were those people doing? You know, some of the settlers might have had a gun in the wagon. Most of the settlers probably had a gun in the wagon. The townspeople had guns at home. They maybe had a pocket pistol in their pocket out going to town. But they weren't, you know, carrying a musket with a cartridge box or whatever. And in the Civil War, the soldiers that were actively fighting the war were carrying soldier-type equipment. The people who weren't were either completely unarmed or had, you know, a revolver at home or something like that, and that was the only thing they had. And if you think some future situation is going to be much different than, you know, the Wild West mixed with the Civil War or whatever, I highly question that. Look at Ukraine right now. It's gotten to the point there that, you know, there are a few people walking around with long guns all the time, but you know what? Most of them are in the Ukrainian army or some Ukrainian militia. You know, you see some guy standing down at a road corner with a double-barrel shotgun running a checkpoint. He's got a long gun on. Do all the rest of the people? Not for the most part. You know, long guns are big and heavy. People don't carry them if they're not going to use them. And it's just, people are generally lazy. Like, lazy people survive. That's the lesson of history, really. Why do lazy people survive? Well, in like caveman days, whoever got the most amount of stuff with the least amount of work was the one thriving. I'm not saying like, oh, they just sit there and did nothing or whatever. I'm talking about like, we killed a moose, right? Do you drag that whole carcass back and use every bit of it? Or do you hack off the limbs and take the fucking best cuts off the animal and run that shit back to your camp? You know, mostly what cavemen or whatever did was cut limbs off and take, you know, the best cut of meat they could get and run before the predators got there. Forget what they called that in archaeology. There was a whole like theory around that where like when you find Stone Age kill sites, you'll find limbs missing often because it was a quick thing to get. Anyway, in the more modern world, you know, the lazy man, quote unquote, is minding his own business and worried about his own survival and not getting involved in the greater conflict. Whereas the guy that is all, I'm going to be a civilian Green Beret, goes out and does his civilian Green Beret shit and gets killed. This is where the small compact carry gun, while not the best thing in the world, you'll have it with you all the time. You can hide it through checkpoints and shit like that. It doesn't draw a lot of attention. It's a very everyman kind of a thing. If I was only going to have one gun for shit hits the fan, that's the thing I would have. Anything else is low propensity of use and or, you know, useless. Now, something like hunting guns or whatever, that's a little bit of a different argument. If you're going to legitimately be hunting, like you live out in a cabin in the middle of the woods and there's tons of deer around, okay, have a hunting rifle too, but and maybe your hunting rifle could be something like an AR that's more capable, but in reality, hunting and shit hits the fan is not a long-term thing, more than likely, unless you're in an area with a hell of a lot of game and really few people. I think the hunting thing and shit's the fan is a complex issue. It's probably worth a whole nother video, but those people in my mind are less ridiculous than the civilian Green Berets. The other advantage that I see that the little concealed carry pistol has is assuming that shit is still to the point where there's a farmer's market or something like that going on, or someplace where you have to go to do X, Y, or Z in your town. That's the gun you would take to do such things. You know, whether it's, you know, going to a general store or whatever like that, and they'd be like, well, that shit doesn't exist around here. If shit gets bad enough, quickly enough, it might take it a little bit for that sort of stuff to get established, but people are going to come together and figure that shit out. You know, no one just sits there and starves to death. People make plans. I think you would be very surprised how quickly some sort of like trading post would get established, how quickly some sort of general store with what little supplies you can get would be established, and how quickly a farmer's market type situation would become the norm. You know, somebody somewhere is growing food. It's going to rot. They want to sell it or trade it for shit they can use. This was the way of the world for thousands of fucking years. You know, maybe like New York and Los Angeles, that shit probably ain't gonna happen, right? But if you live in fucking Podunk, Iowa or something like that, like, it's a little bit more realistic. So it really depends a lot on where you are. And like, if you live in New York City or Los Angeles, you might as well get the civilian Green Beret shit, because you're probably gonna die anyway. Any of those massive cities on the coasts are just going to be death fields. And that's just from a how long without water and power and food does that become an unsustainable situation for the people there? And it's like 3 or 4 days. And again, that's a situation where you might want to have a ability to bug out or something like that, go somewhere else. And you're not going to be alone in that thought. There's going to be massive herds of people doing that. Do you really want to be doing that mass migration, possibly on foot, with, you know, an AR-15 and 20 magazines? Not really. Well, I don't carry 20 magazines. I'm only going to carry 4. Well, for like a wilderness survival rifle or something like that, 4 magazines for an AR is a lot of ammo. For the end of the world, and we're probably going to get into a gunfight because I have an AR-15 slung over my shoulder and now I'm a target for other people that have that. That's not a lot of ammo. So you're kind of just carrying shit just to carry shit at that point. Just my opinion, but for the most part, all of this shit is, you know, semi-useless once you take into account the reality of that scenario. The whole idea of having a shit hits the fan arsenal becomes really unrealistic. You know, it's more realistic if you're like at a cabin somewhere or something like that, and you're going to defend your property from people that might try to take it from you. Okay, that's just not most people. Most people live in a house somewhere in suburbia or in an apartment in the city, and those situations aren't going to last very long. Like, suburbia is going to hold up a little longer than the city will, but again, how long without water, food, and power is that situation unsustainable? So most people are probably going to be on foot or in a vehicle traveling to their, you know, cousin's house out in the middle of nowhere that they barely know because they have a cattle ranch or some shit. You know, there's lots of people like that. And then there's a whole bunch of people that'd be like, well, I don't know where to go, but any place is better than here. Or this guy said he knows a cattle ranch, and like now you have 200 fucking people following you, and that's something that you'd have to watch out for too. Like, the idea of being the civilian Green Beret and training up your fucking militia and marching across the country isn't a good idea, because there's basically nowhere you could take such a force and actually feed and supply them in the long term. If you do have a cousin with a cattle ranch, a single like cattle ranch could feed a lot of people for a short time, or it could feed a very few number of people in the long term. Unless it's one of those massive outfits that, you know, supplies beef to the beef industry or some shit like that. Like, those places, sure. But that's probably not what your cousin owns. Your cousin probably has, you know, 20 cows in a pasture or something like that, and maybe a few horses. And if you breed those animals and get a consistent, you know, crop every year of calves going, and kill off the older ones and maybe kill off a couple of steer or something every year, they'll provide a lot of food for a dozen people maybe. That's sustainable. If you have more than that, you're going to eat through all your fucking food. So the idea of arming up all of your neighbors and taking off to your cousin's house or wherever it is you're going to go is not really a feasible plan in my mind. And once you're one man on your own, or, you know, you and your immediate family, you're not enough of a force to fight things that you might encounter along the way. So, like, the only way to really go is to be the gray man and try to slip through the cracks, right? Well, these are my thoughts on the best shit hit the fan gun. I hope you liked it. I'm going to make a couple more videos on this subject, and watch out for those. I'll see you guys later.